Well, good. So we're still in What If Jesus Were Serious, or was serious, depending on your grammar. What if Jesus was serious? Any thoughts from the last few weeks of lessons that you want to start with? No, okay, we'll jump right in. So we're still in salt and light. So beginning this section, we're going to read that part of the Sermon on the Mount, and then we'll jump into our next lesson. So you can follow along if you can read that, if it's big enough. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Any other thoughts on salt and light this week? Because I think we've talked about that at least the last week or so. So we started with a quote from last week. I think Terry talked about this one from Charles Spurgeon. And Charles Spurgeon died in the late 1800s. Let me see if I can make yours. See, we have a lag. Sorry, guys, online. The Bible is not the light of the world. It is the light of the church. But the world does not read the Bible. The world reads Christians. You are the light of the world. Interesting, right? Because we know, and it depends on how far we get today, the world is not reading the Bible. And in fact, a lot of the church is not actually reading the Bible either when you start looking at some of the research. Yeah, but this was written in the late 1800s.
And also, the only way that light can make a difference is to be in dark.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times in the past, I think we, as Christians and Jesus followers, we've often hammered a separation there. And yet, if we're to be light in the world, and we've got to be in.
We have to be in the world. That's right. And we'll actually talk about that depending on how far we get today. We will talk about that. And this is from John Stott, much more recent. You can see by the color photo. We should not ask what is wrong with the world, for that diagnosis has already been given. Rather, we should ask what has happened to the salt and the light. And we did talk about this a few weeks ago, in that when we talk about, oh no, what has society done? Look at our television shows. It's so much worse than when I grew up, or whatever comparison period you want. Question is, has society really gotten worse? Or is our impact on society gotten less? You know, it's an interesting question. Is there too much world in the church, or is there not enough church in the world? How would you answer that? Is there too much world in the church, or is there not enough church in the world? It is a combination, absolutely.
I think it's a combination, but I also think we're too quick to judge. We're too quick to want, and it's funny because I've been preaching on John 8 today. We're too quick. We just want to throw stones. Mm-hmm. We're shocked and we make snide remarks and all that kind of stuff instead of truly being salt and light. Jesus, he wasn't bent out of shape by sinners and sin.
Right.
But we get so bent out of shape and back off from it, and all we do is can you believe? Can you watch us on TV last night?
Yeah. But yet somehow we knew what was on TV last night.
Right.
Yeah. So I think David's read my notes, by the way.
Oh,
my goodness gracious. Yeah. So today we're going to start with chapter 13 of the book. which is about justice and evangelism. In this section of the book, he talks about if Jesus was serious, then both evangelism and justice matter. I think one thing we've seen over the last few years is that, there's a group that says evangelism is more important. And there's a group that says social justice is more important. And we've seen whole denominations split, if you go back to the early 1900s, over this issue. And we've seen lots of churches split over this issue. Justice being the social reconciliation between people, and evangelism being the personal reconciliation to God. Whether we combat the evil in the world first, or we must transform the people first. Right? We've seen to have gone in two different directions. We have a preference many times, and we can see that. A lot of people have a distinct reaction when people talk about social justice. So how do we balance? If the locomotive is love instead of either justice or evangelism, how do we start with love and then show people either the justice or the need to tell them about Jesus? That's difficult. Last night we had trunk or treat. Probably not the time. We had a lot of people, by the way, and it was a lot of fun. And most people who came, we've never seen before. Is that the time to start handing out tracts and telling them, maybe if the tract came out of your nose, maybe they, for those of you who are here, yeah, that would be weird. It's a little crazy. But yeah, how do we take what we did last night and turn it into something more, right? In that case, it's got to start with the love, right? Spending the time with the families. And there was a huge variety of people here. Many ethnicities, many income levels. You could really see it as they came by. But a chance just to have some fun with some families and some kids. And it's a good thing to start there. But it's a balance. It's a tough balance. It's a tough balance. And I think we actually do that relatively well here, I think. But I've seen other places that seem to get on their social justice train or just their evangelism train and really ignore the other side. Thoughts? So here is another John Stott quote, and this is actually a complicated one. I'll read it slowly. So then, we should never put our two vocations to be salt and light, our Christian social and evangelistic responsibilities, over against each other, as if we had to choose between them. We should not exaggerate either, not disparage either at the expense of the other. Neither can be a substitute for the other. The world needs both. It is bad and needs salt. It is dark and needs light. So when you talk about what does salt and light mean, salt, defensive responsibility against decay. You can equate that to the injustice that we see. And then light, the offensive responsibility of spreading truth and goodness and beauty. And that really advances the kingdom of heaven, God's kingdom. Yes, David.
I was thinking about your question. Can you really separate? Oh, are we your notes?
No, good.
Can you really separate the two? Because, Jesus was asked specifically, what is the greatest commandment? And he said, praise love God. And the second is not below it.
Right.
He said the second is just like it. You love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so it can't be separated.
Mm-hmm.
Evangelism and justice in people's lives. I think it goes back to James, also with Brother Jesus wrote. You see somebody that's hungry, you don't say, "Oh, I'll be well fed." I think in other words, let's talk God to them. Don't even worry about the fact that they're hungry. our faith causes us to take care of their need that's pressing right in front of them. Who's going to want to listen to anything we have to say if there's something that's in
That's right.
reality?
That's right.
And in other issues as well.
Absolutely. Shelley.
I was just having a memory. It's been over 20 years. So I'm looking around. Thinking, yeah, I'm thinking you were in the room. But I was doing Meals on Wheels, boys' night at Meals on Wheels for years. Bible study there. And for this told to quit because through Meals on Wheels, you're not supposed to talk about that. So I was making a mistake by delivering with her Meals on Wheels.
You couldn't talk. Yeah.
I was encouraged to stop.
To stop.
Someone encouraged me to stop.
Yeah.
Which seems a little-
It does seem crazy. And again, and that's, I guess if we go back, that slide is right. If we leave with love first, right? Again, a lot of those things open up our discussions. But, just as Adley used to teach in one of the inner city Peoria schools, she couldn't start the day with the kids until she made sure they were fed, that they had breakfast, right? And now most of us don't have to deal with that, but just like anybody, until they're fed and safe, talking about the gospel probably isn't going to meet their immediate need.
Along with what Shelley's saying, I think a lot of our thinking is that you go to someone like last night with y'all, and you give them the gospel message, and if they don't accept it, like, man, you start like, oh God, they're not interested, well, go to hell, or something, you know what I mean? I mean, we've done that, but I did Meals on Wheels for like 13 years in DeSoto, in the St. Louis area, and it was probably year 8, but I've been there, that the director of Meals on Wheels actually came to me and asked me if we can't call it a Bible study because of the government, but can we do a spiritual enrichment time? And that's what we called it, and we did it, but if I go there the first week, 2 weeks, first month, I said, hey, I want to have a Bible study with these people.
Right.
But it takes time to build relationships. And I think that's what you see with Jesus, is that he took the time to build solid relationship with people, meeting their needs where they were at.
That's right. It is amazing that when he was healing, again, that came first. And a lot of times that then was the message later. Although a lot of the people who came to him already had an idea of what the message was going to be, a lot came just for the healing. And a lot left with only the healing. So when we can look at a couple Bible verses here, Isaiah 58, which I had you guys read a couple weeks ago, and hopefully you did. Because in verses 6 through 10, is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen to loose the chains of injustice? So it's really comparing the fasting that they were doing, which was, hey, I'm fasting, did you notice? Versus the kind of fasting that he would like them to do. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter, when you see the naked to clothe him, and not to run away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer, and you will cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you do away with the yoke of oppression, with the pointing finger and malicious talk, and if you spend yourselves in behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your night will become like the noonday. I really don't remember Isaiah 58 before this lesson. But it had a lot in there that's convicting. Very interesting. And then from Matthew 28. This is our typical go-to scripture. Starting in verse 17, when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always, even to the end of the earth. So we can clearly see messages of both justice and evangelism in the Bible. And I think it is so good for us to have that balance. But one thing I want to, and this applies to a lot of things, this last note here, don't let your theology be set by a reaction. Pendulum swinging theology is rarely sound. I think in a lot of cases, and I think this has happened, again, as you see some of the church splits from the early 1900s, one church went all the way to social justice, and a lot of other churches said, no, we can't do that, and they swung completely the other way. Theology that is set by a reaction to something else we're seeing in society typically is one-sided, even when it's right. That's kind of the scary thing. And we do that, unfortunately, more often than we think, especially ask your kids why we have a certain position on something. They'll tell you what they have seen rather than what you perceived from maybe when it was thought it was a new or a good idea, right? The kids seem to pick up on something very different than maybe we intended.
One of Gene Urey's favorite slogans is the WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I think with this study that you and Terry are reading this in, hopefully it gets us to Jesus, really, and question we need to be asking concerning any of our theology. What would Jesus do in this situation? And, driving a bus, school bus. I got a little boy, 16 now. It's actually a female. Jethani is a male. And I didn't know that for the first month, but we built a relationship. And so when I found out, I still, what would Jesus do? And I think for a lot of us, and maybe myself even in the past, I would have gone, oh, wow, well, I got to shun this person. I can't get around this person, or I will tell you what God says, and then, hey, take it or leave it type thing. Well, fast forward, Friday morning, we didn't have school, and he wanted to come to our house and have breakfast.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we did, and had 2.5 hours of breakfast because he had somewhere else that he had to go. And Friday morning, we found out that I'm a preacher. I'd never brought that part up. I spent time just loving this kid, just being a part of this kid's life. He's the one that wanted to come to our house and have breakfast. He had never met Sherry. And so we talked, right? We talked a lot. The way that it came out, he's an artist, and someone had asked him to draw he's got a picture in on one of our state representatives' office up in Washington, D.C. He chose it. But he was going to do a picture of the prodigal son. And when he brought that out, I started questioning, you know what the prodigal son's about? All this, blah, blah, blah. And yes, he did. And different things like that. So that's when I just said, well, I want to share something with you, because you shared a lot of deep stuff with me. I'm a preacher. And his first statement was, I'm not surprised. Because he goes, you care so much and you love so deeply. And so I don't, you know what I mean? I don't know where this is going, but what would Jesus do in this situation with anyone standing in front of us?
Right. If you guys online couldn't hear that, I'm sorry. The story of David and a new friend that they have made that came over for breakfast on Friday. Really a great example of us starting with love. Absolutely.
Well, you speak the truth in love. I'm talking about in Ephesians 4:15. Love is what draws people to you, but truth is what transforms.
Right.
Love isn't going to transform someone, but it will draw them to you, and it'll make you irresistible that people will want to be around you.
Yeah.
But then it opens them up to the truth.
That's right.
And truth is the only thing that can change life. None of us can change life.
That's right. Yeah. People won't listen without the love first. They've got to want to have their ears open. Yes, Fern.
Many years ago, we rented our upstairs apartment to a girl. And we thought, I've seen her girl, she was working. But she moved boyfriend, and he was a drug dealer. And then, so one night, we were coming in, we didn't ride her after, but we heard him say, "Blood all over me. I'm going to get a gun and go kill him or something." Anyway, he's going to go get a gun. Well, a few days later, we saw him bringing a gun in the house. So we asked him to leave. And he said, "No, my father's a judge and my mother's a lawyer. You can't make us leave." And then he said, "Why don't you practice your religion?" He saw that we went to church, I guess. And I thought, well, I don't know what he said. John Baptist got his head cut off because he told the person who was living in sin. And but they did go ahead and move out. But then when the last month's rent was paid by a check, when the check came back and sufficient funds. So I said, I'm going to take it to the courthouse. And my husband said, "Oh, let it go." They moved out there. But I did. I took it to the small claim court. And pretty soon, the check had the judge's address. So pretty soon, the girl came with money, and she said that the judge, the courts, they told her, "Hey, and be sure to get a receipt and to move out of the county." And so they saw that I don't know what they thought that being going to church would make us accept his drug deal. And we knew they were doing it because all kind of with the guy coming to the door. My kids were scared.
Yeah.
Because and we could smell the smoke that in the house coming.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
I thought that was strange.
Yeah.
Thing to say.
That's right.
Then I guess you'd say something.
That's right. Always a interesting balance between justice and evangelism and love. Okay, we're going to jump into the next section, chapter 14 of the book. Again, still on salt and light. If Jesus was serious, then we must not withdraw from our culture. Kind of what David was saying before. One of our big questions is, why is the world so bad and who is to blame? We're very quick at the blame game. I don't know if that's a recent thing or if that's been around humans forever. But we like to know who to blame. And it's interesting, Christians, have seemed to respond in a couple ways to our culture, right? We've withdrawn, and then we start blaming. And when we withdraw, a lot of times this is where we would just want to withdraw into ourselves. We've created, a Christian subculture, with all the schools and the music and the industries that go along with it. And I'm not saying any of that's a bad thing, but what happens is when we completely withdraw from society, we also withdraw the salt and the light that goes with it. And that becomes difficult because that's not what Jesus was saying. If he's saying for us to be the salt and the light, when we completely withdraw, we're no longer truly that salt and the light in the world.
Well, you think about your house, and at night, you got lights on in different rooms, but as you get ready to go to bed, you go and cut the lights out in the rooms. Well, what happens? Well, darkness overtakes those areas.
Those
that
areas.
once had light. And I think that's so true, what you're saying about, we have withdrawn. And one of the things that the last series of sermons that really moved me and opened my eyes is that our enemy is not people.
Right.
It's not flesh and blood. So who's to blame? Satan's to blame. He's planting these seeds of darkness and evil in people's hearts. He's the father of lies. Jesus said that. He's deceptive. And so, we can't withdraw.
Right. Yeah, I think that's is a metaphor, a simile. I don't remember which that is. But thinking of your house, right? As you get ready for bed at night, as you shut off lights, those rooms go dark. And if we do that, if we remove ourselves from those areas of society, they will also go dark. And we won't have that impact in those areas. Again, not that some of this is bad. It's just when we've completely removed ourselves, there really is no one there to make a difference. No one there to make a difference. So the call to be salt and light, really should temper our temptation to withdraw. Now, you can always come up with a situation where withdrawal is probably the best situation. But if that's our first response and maybe our only response, it's probably not the right thing to do. Right? And light covered is useless and salt not used is useless. But sometimes that's just our reaction. So with that comes the question, why are we so eager to withdraw from the world? If that's our first response, what's the reason? Is it to preserve our own self-righteousness? Is it to escape from the world's problems? Is it fear of failure? Fear does a lot for us, usually negative. Are we withdrawing because we know if we get in that situation, we're most likely to fail?
Maybe it's wonderful only, because if you have to figure out how to deal with this situation daily. You don't have a thought of how you're going to deal with this. We used to say living is wrong. That person obviously is doing what God wanted to do, and I want to be part of it. I want to tell him how to do it. I'm just going to stay away from it.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem right now. Is that the culture is moving, especially for some of our younger people. Go out and offer your child with the best plan. Everyone has a different perspective on it.
Right.
So it's going to be hard. We're going to have to figure out how to sit down and say, this is what God says about it. This is the way we should deal with it.
Yeah.
Hasn't worked very well.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. And Dean's point was we don't seem to be well prepared to handle these situations. So therefore our response is withdrawal. So does that mean, I guess asking the adults, and then we'll ask a kid question. Adults, do we feel prepared to handle these situations? Is the church preparing you to handle really difficult situations that you get into in the world? Is your study of the Bible helping you to prepare for these situations? And if it's not helping us as adults get prepared, what do we think it's doing to our kids? Are they prepared?
It's just like the study. Jesus really needs. You know, anything we read in the Bible, do we really believe it? And when he says that we are planting seed, he gives the increase. You can't give the increase, Aaron. I can't give the increase. None of us can make that seed grow.
Right.
Only God can make that seed grow. And so when he tells us to love our neighbors, we love ourselves, is serious. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, how would you want to be treated? How would you want to be loved? And so, you know, I just, we've got, we don't begin with a situation right in front of us. This is stuff that has been, the Holy Spirit has been transforming in us through all the lessons y'all have taught, the sermons, Bible lessons from years back, whatever, hopefully, that it's amazing that the Holy Spirit is transforming us into this kind of person. And I love when you use Matthew 28. I never really fully understood when Jesus said it again, and I will be with you always to the end of it. Why is that part connected with the Great Commission? It's because we have so much fear in going as we go through our day into our world and making disciples. And Jesus said, hey, chill. I'm with you, and I'll always be with you.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, so what can we do if one of our reasons for withdrawing is because we don't know how to address the world or be prepared to address the world? What do we need to do as a church, as a people, as individuals, as families, to be prepared?
I think we have to do a better job of sitting down and asking what are the questions, and looking at the Bible and really try to understand what God wants us to do. Because what I see is the stakes are, as your kids grow up and you're trying to teach them, bring them to church, and you try to teach them the best you can, and it's something like sexuality or whatever, we don't press, we don't touch on that much. And when we do, it's really easy. There's a lot of verses to talk about it. And I think our response is that it's not right. Here's why. List all those. That's about it. You're uncomfortable, not know what else to say. So it's
Yeah.
wrong. So don't do it. And people that do it are wrong, and we stay away from them. And the next thing you know, you haven't dealt with that much, then your kids are, it is a much more common occurrence than
Right.
now. They have friends, and then their mindset can become about it. It becomes, well, why did God let these people stay? And that's the problem. We're not they change it from, not kind of go through the end. We don't love them, So what is our response? What should it be?
Right.
We don't want to talk about it, but I think it's something we have to talk about.
That's right. If we don't talk about it, they're going to pick up a different perspective. And that perspective a lot of times starts with correct reasons, right? I mean, look at all the problems, the trouble, the discrimination, the picking on that some of these kids have had. And it doesn't take as much of a stretch to say, look, clearly they're not loved by the Christian culture. And if Christian culture is about love, it quickly escalates into something we're not controlling the narrative of, but it starts from a really correct spot.
Just like the leaves, so
And we need to be a part of that cure. Yes. But we but we have to teach our kids and our families how to interact with these situations, or we lose control. Definitely. Well, just a couple verses to look at here. We'll close quickly, but 1 Peter 2 talk about living such good lives among the pagans that they will notice that it's so clear how we're living that they can't even speak poorly about us. That's a pretty high calling, and one that we fail a lot in. And Isaiah 49, this one's interesting because this is actually, Old Testament, but it's about making you a light to the Gentiles. Talk about foreshadowing what's to come. I mean, this specifically talks about being a light to those of a different group. So good. Salt and light, we've basically finished then with this section. Next week, we're going to dive into something that I can't say that I totally understand, but it's that Jesus came to fulfill the law and the prophets, not to abolish them. And what does this section mean? Not sure will completely solve all your problems, but it's got a couple interesting things that he calls out on this one that I think are worthwhile. So come back next week. Glad to have you here today. Thanks for coming, everybody.